Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I'm very honored today to be joined by Thomas Wines. He joins us from Santa Barbara Nutrients, all the way over there in the USA. I was introduced to Santa Barbara Nutrients and to Thomas through Jessiana, who we did a podcast with a week or so ago, all about polycystic kidney disease and how potentially getting people into a ketogenic state and improving the ketone pathways actually helps with things like polycystic kidney disease. And this is actually something that Santa Barbara Nutrients specialize in. They've got this amazing formula called KetoCitra, which is what Jessiana and her team are mostly using in their protocols. And it's definitely what Emily and myself and Duncan, that we're all using with our patients when we have someone with polycystic kidney disease, and we know the amazing benefits of getting people into ketogenesis and just giving them a little extra hand with the amazing product KetoCitra. So Thomas, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Fiona. It's great to see you.
Thanks. So why don't we start with maybe just telling us a little bit about how Santa Barbara Nutrients got started and why you have such an interest in kidney disease, specifically polycystic kidney disease and all things keto.
Yeah, good question. I actually have sort of two jobs. My real job, my day job is I'm a professor at the University of California in Santa Barbara. And there I've been focusing on polycystic kidney disease research for 20 plus years or so. And we, have investigated molecular pathways and, all the nitty-gritty underlying signaling pathways to understand a little bit better why the disease happens, so to speak. But we've also, been looking at possible therapeutic strategies and so on. And we most recently, in the last few years, sort of came across sort of mechanisms that are actually very easy to influence by dietary interventions, turns out. So, all these years now we've been thinking in terms of drugs and pharmaceuticals, but turns out, potentially this disease could actually be influenced much more beneficially and maybe very powerfully by dietary interventions. The negative, of course, is what are you going to do with a diet, right? So you cannot put it in a bottle or and sell it, or so no pharmaceutical company would really be interested in that. And the problem is, of course, clinical trials are extremely expensive. To get a new drug to market costs about $1.5 billion US, roughly on average. That's a bit of money, and it's of course completely impossible to ever get that kind of money back with food. So it will never happen that a food gets tested sort of to the same level as drugs get tested. So that's just not a thing.
So glad you mentioned that, because that is the trouble we have with herbs and nutrients. So a lot of people ask about why they're not many or more really good quality clinical trials, and it's exactly what you're saying. No one runs them because the return on them, you can't patentize any of this stuff, so drug companies won't make money. So thank you for addressing it. I appreciate it. Sorry, keep going.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's actually an important point. Like lay people don't necessarily know all the the financials behind there, and they think, oh, hey, if somebody has a supplement, they better do a clinical trial, otherwise I don't take it. They can wait forever and ever until the end of the world, and this will never happen just because exactly. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't work. But anyway, so we decided to just take matters into our own hands rather than just simply publishing a paper and hoping for something to happen, which probably wouldn't happen. So we said, all right, let's launch a company and see what we can do. And we came up with a formulation that actually is based on the research of a what's called a medical food in the US, containing a couple of the key ingredients that we found to be very beneficial in polycystic kidney disease in animal research. And they all happen to be food ingredients, so it was possible to actually formulate this as a medical food that way. And that then, led to the founding of Santa Barbara Nutrients. And a lot of people came together, lots of patients actually with PKD that are also industry professionals, and that it was just like a fantastic group of people all coming together saying, hey, this looks amazing, we want to help out, what can we do? So we have fantastic people on there. There's now a patent, it goes through the university, of course, and our company is licensing the patent. We at least we can we can have a product out there. We actually are planning clinical trials, but of course not to the kind of like FDA type of standards, which would cost literally tens of millions of dollars at the very, very least. So we're doing more of a shoestring budget type of clinical trial. Yeah.
Amazing. And so tell me a little bit about, I don't know if you want to talk about what's in KetoCitra and the pathways that it hits and exactly how the formula works. That would be amazing if you wanted to cover that with me.
Right. Okay, sure. So what we discovered in my lab at the university is that there are essentially two different pathways that turn out to be strong influencers of disease progression in polycystic kidney disease. So as you know, PKD is a genetic disease. So, the patient inherits a gene. There's nothing you can do about that. But then the rate of progression of the disease, I don't think that is written in stone. And patients oftentimes unfortunately think that, and maybe they get told that. They say, oh, I have a genetic disease, I can't fix my genes, it is what it is, I give up. And so all right, I think that mindset, hopefully we can change a little bit, because I do think that patients can do something about it. So of course they cannot fix their faulty gene, but they can, I think, very clearly affect the rate of progression of the disease. So you can slow it down, I think. Maybe you can stop it, and who knows, maybe you can reverse it. So all this will hopefully come out eventually in clinical trials, what exactly the level of benefit is there. So these two different pathways are number one, the metabolic state of ketosis. And number two are these microcrystals that can form in kidneys, and they can cause microscopic injury and essentially makes the disease worse. That's we sort of published two papers in the same year, 2 or 3 years ago. One paper on each of these stories. And for the ketosis story, what we found is that if you put rodents or even cats with polycystic kidney disease into nutritional ketosis, it's amazingly beneficial. And we did time-restricted feeding. We did ketogenic diets and even acute fasting experiments to look at fast effects and so on. But what we also did is something I didn't necessarily think would work. So we just supplemented the animals with the ketone beta-hydroxybutyrate. Which is, of course,
want to just explain what that is to people that don't understand what BHB is? So, yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So we humans, as well as, all those animals out there, we have different stores for energy in our bodies. And obviously one store is the fat stores, right? All of our fat tissue. And but the fat tissue never gets used, so the fat in there never gets used unless you're in ketosis. So if somebody wants to lose weight, they want to lose fat weight, you can forget about it unless you're in ketosis. And so ketosis essentially is the body adaptation to fasting. When your blood glucose levels go down and you don't eat a lot of carbohydrates, then something switches. The body says, okay, now it is time to use up our fat reserves, which is, obviously how we all evolved. That's actually what it's meant to be. And and then that's what happens. That's called the state of ketosis. And the reason why it's called ketosis is because some of these fats that are released are then converted by the liver to ketones. That's where the name comes from. And these ketones are just small molecules that are, then put by the liver into circulation, and they get eaten up by all the cells in the body for energy instead of glucose. And that's essentially what ketosis is. So you're kind of getting rid of the dependence on blood sugar. And instead, you're using up all your fat reserves, and they get, converted to ketones, and that's what's being used by cells. And the main ketone is called beta hydroxybutyrate, and because it's a mouthful, we just call it BHB.
Yeah.
That's the one. And, the liver during fasting conditions makes a lot of BHB, many grams per day. But you can also cheat and take exogenous ketone. You just essentially, put it in a drink, for example, and you kind of help out your body. So you don't necessarily have to be fasting, right? So which, of course, wouldn't be sustainable in the long term anyway. You cannot start, fast for the rest of your life. So that's essentially the, what ketosis is and what BHB is, beta hydroxybutyrate. And
sorry to interrupt you. The BHP almost is like tricking the body because you're taking it endogenously. It's making the body think that you're producing its natural ketones from the liver. It circulates the bloodstream and tricks the body into using and burning fat stores rather than glucose stores.
Exactly, yeah. And an interesting aspect there is that BHB is not only an energy source for cells, so it does get burned for energy, and but in addition, BHB is also a signaling molecule, so it also instructs the cells to do things differently, because now the cells can realize, oh, hey, I'm in ketosis, so I have to change my gene expression, I have to change the way I operate, and so on. And it is, for example, also a strong anti-inflammatory molecule, so which is what one would want in a disease where inflammation plays a big role, such as chronic kidney disease in general, and polycystic kidney disease as well in particular. So BHB turns out to be a pretty interesting molecule. It kind of acts on many different pathways at the same time.
Yeah, it's certainly an amazing thing. Okay, great. And so what else is in there? The BHB, and then you've obviously got something with these crystals. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the crystal story is the second mechanism that we have worked out. As everybody knows, there are kidney stones. People get kidney stones every once in a while, and there are kind of three major types of kidney stones. There's calcium oxalate, there's calcium phosphate, and there's uric acid in humans. And these kidney stones, they can get really big, but obviously they don't start out big. They start out microscopically small, as tiny microcrystals that actually form inside the kidney as the urine is produced. And the reason why these microcrystals form is because these very same substances, calcium oxalate, calcium phosphate, and uric acid, tend to be very insoluble. So as the kidney is concentrating the urine and producing the urine, these insoluble compounds tend to precipitate and form crystals. And if that happens in the kidney, that's of course bad news, because these crystals, they look like little pieces of broken glass, and they're just scratch along the kidney tubules, and they can rip the kidney to shreds and cause microscopic injury and so on. So what we had discovered is that these microcrystals that actually in humans, they form day in, day out. We all, pee out millions of these crystals oftentimes. And usually it's harmless. Our kidneys can deal with them. But every once in a while, some of these crystals get stuck in the kidney. And we had asked the question, okay, if they get stuck, what does the kidney do? And what we discovered is something that hopefully will make it into textbooks one of those days. The kidney tubules, they can actually dilate in response to these stuck crystals. So it's like, the plumbing actually gets bigger and you can flush out the crystals that way. Seems like a really great invention. Strangely, that hadn't been known before. Before we found this.
Really?
And,
so you're well, congratulations for finding that.
Yeah.
It makes logical sense when you say it. The human body is so amazing. But
right. Yeah, for some reason, it hadn't really clicked before. And what we found is that this tubule dilation also goes along with activation of certain signaling pathways in these tubule cells, and there happen to be the same signaling pathways that are also activated in polycystic kidney disease, which is, a disease where these tubules essentially get so big that they form cysts eventually. And what we found is if you take an animal that forms polycystic kidneys and you challenge them with these microcrystals, their cysts they get many more cysts, they get much worse disease. So you can accelerate the disease progression and make it worse. So it's great to know what makes the disease worse, because then we can think of ways of taking that factor away. And that's actually pretty straightforward, in humans. So like I said, calcium oxalate is one component, and oxalate comes primarily from the food. From certain plant foods, spinach is like super high in oxalate,
Kale, yeah.
But also yummy things like dark chocolate and so on. So that's actually a thing. But if somebody happens to eat, dark chocolate by the pounds, they can actually get acute kidney injury because of all the oxalate in there. So you can essentially, if a patient knows that oxalate is bad, they can take it away from their food. And instead of spinach, you eat something else that is much lower in oxalate. The other component is calcium phosphate. And one of the worst sources of phosphate are these inorganic phosphate additives that we have in almost all the processed foods. They have no nutritional value. They're not in there, for our health. They're just in there for food chemistry reasons, right? To make it for the food industry to make their processed food. So there's absolutely no reason to consume those. And if you're aware of it and you have kidney disease, I would say read the food labels and don't buy anything that has added phosphate food additives. So that's the other thing. And then the third thing is the uric acid that can form these microcrystals. And that can also be influenced by a number of things. Number one, you can limit the intake of the precursor for uric acid, which are these purines that are kind of very common in meat, for example.
Yep. Beer.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, okay. And you can, but you can also, the funny thing with uric acid is that it is only insoluble under acidic conditions. So if the urine is very acidic, let's say pH 5 or so, then the kidney has a really hard time excreting all that uric acid, and there's a high risk for these crystals to form. So what you'd want to do is you bring the urine pH back to a much more normal level, to a more neutral level, and you can then antagonize the negative effects of these uric acid crystals, so they essentially don't form that way. So those are kind of the things you can do. And one aspect that's in KetoCitra then is number one, it provides what's called an alkaline load. So there is, it's formulated in a way that it helps the kidney normalize the urine pH. So you're getting closer to, say, like 6.5 or so back again, where it's supposed to be. And the other ingredient in there is citrate. So what is citrate?
Favorite alkali of all time.
Right. Yeah. So citrate, essentially citric acid. I think everyone is familiar with it. You can cook with it and so on. So it's obviously just a natural compound. But it also happens to be the natural defense, or one of the natural defenses of the kidney against calcium crystal precipitation, because the citrate is a funny molecule. It grabs calcium and kind of it chelates it, and it prevents the formation of calcium oxalate and phosphate. So normally the kidney has a lot of citrate that it puts into the urine and kind of protects itself. But under acidic urine conditions, the kidney cannot excrete citrate anymore as efficiently, and you end up with what's called hypocitraturia. So you have low levels of citrate. So, and that's unfortunately what happens also in patients with PKD, and actually usually in CKD in general. is that patients have a certain level of metabolic acidosis that just causes a low urine pH. And then low urine pH equals low urine citrate levels. So you kind of get stuck with a condition that predisposes you to forming these microcrystals. So in KetoCitra, we have then in there also citrate. So in addition to raising the urine pH level, we're also supplying the citrate so that we can antagonize the hypocitraturia and kind of normalize those levels again. So it's kind of like a blend of all these natural compounds that happen to be beneficial in all these pathways that make PKD worse.
Yeah. Amazing. And it's exactly Jesse Anna, I think Jesse Anna and I were speaking about it, or maybe it was Emily and I, about why we use magnesium citrate in the citrate form for exactly that reason, because it's such a powerful alkalizer. People with CKD are citrate deficient, as you spoke about, which then increases their risk of kidney stones and everything else. Plus, the amazing thing about citrates, most people are aware of sodium bicarbonate and use that. But the problem with the sodium bicarbonate is you're lowering the pH of the stomach acidity. So you're then making yourself more prone to indigestion and reflux and a whole pile of other things, and not breaking down your food properly. And then when you've got things like oxalates and purines and things like that, if that's not been properly broken down with correct stomach acid, that can feed more into that pathway. Whereas using citrates to buffer acidosis and high pH levels is a much safer, better way of doing it. Plus, you are benefiting the kidneys that are often deficient in it. So it's a much better, smarter thing to use. So
totally agree. Plus, KetoCitra is sodium free, as opposed to sodium bicarbonate, which has the sodium already in the word. So you prevent this massive load of sodium there as well. I think that can only be beneficial, because most people just get way too much sodium in their diet. And actually, instead of sodium, KetoCitra contains some potassium. It's not a huge amount. It's kind of the equivalent of a large banana per day. So somebody, unless somebody is in kind of near end-stage kidney disease, they actually benefit typically from increasing their potassium intake. Which most people don't know about. And there's so much interesting misinformation. People look up the internet, Dr. Google, and they see, potassium is bad for kidneys. And it's actually not bad for kidneys. It's actually good for kidneys.
No, exactly. And Emily and I talk about this all the time, that the research shows that if you take out potassium, unless you've got potassium levels elevated in a blood test, and that's the only time you should take it out. And you have to make sure the tourniquet wasn't on too tight, because a tight tourniquet when you're taking bloods will falsely give you an elevated potassium. The potassium taken out early actually accelerates the rate of kidney decline and brings on end-stage kidney disease faster, which is the correct scientific studies. And as you said, I'm often battling with renal dietitians, and that's why I love Jessie Anna and her team and people like you that know that that's not the case, and that actually having potassium in there is actually protective against end-stage kidney disease, unless it's people are really on dialysis where they're using a potassium to flush through, or the kidneys are really jammed up and they're not flushing. But it's very unusual. I would say in 1 to 2% of patients, we see proper, true elevated potassium levels, not done from a tourniquet or blood draw. So it's not something you see often. So yeah, I'm so glad you said that. So it's not just me and Emily and Jessie Anna saying.
Well, I think it's very true, yeah. And it's a little unfortunate that maybe even many doctors kind of get this slightly wrong, and that tell their patients,
absolutely, and nephrologists.
Yeah, right. So we're at Santa Barbara Nutrients, we're also a little bit on a crusade for education. So we try to put out educational materials. Every little bit I think helps, and obviously what you're doing is fantastic. So there's a lot of fantastic educational content there that you're putting out, which is an amazing resource for people.
Yeah, and I like you, and this is why I love connecting with people like you and Santa Barbara Nutrients. And I don't know if you met Dr. Israb. I spoke to him yesterday, and we'll have him on the podcast too. But there is this amazing group of people now that I'm connected to that are crusading for better education and empowerment around kidney disease, and that maybe it's far more treatable than we've been led to believe, and that dialysis and transplant may not be, if we can get in there earlier, may not be the actual outcome for everybody, because there's so much good stuff that we could do. And I feel so blessed to be supported by smart, intelligent people such as yourself that can back up scientifically everything that we've known through looking at our own just studies online and things like that. So tell me a little bit more before we wrap up about what outcomes have you had with people with KetoCitra? What sort of results are you getting when you're getting people with PKD to start implementing KetoCitra into their day-to-day life?
Yeah, good question. So we haven't done a proper clinical trial yet. We're planning a couple of trials, one in Toronto, one in Tokyo, hopefully starting sometime early next year. And these trials will be actually together with Jessiana. And I think she probably told you all about the Renew program that she has designed, and we've kind of created together based on the research and on her clinical experience treating people with chronic kidney disease for a living. So we came up with this Renew program, which is essentially a plant-focused ketogenic diet. So it's not vegan. And most people sometimes, when they hear plant-focused, they run away. They say, oh, it must be vegan. Vegan? No, it's not vegan. But it's just like a little bit more predominant plant, food. And that actually has to do with helping with the urine alkalinization. And it's ketogenic, and it also avoids these renal stressors we have talked about, the oxalate, the phosphate, the uric acid, and it also incorporates KetoCitra. So it's really like a whole package. So we just put everything together that we think kind of adds up to being maximally beneficial. And it's a training program, 3-month training program. So patients go through it and they really learn the ins and outs, why are we, not eating oxalate, and there's a lot of peer support, a lot of tools provided, which I think is really essential in a dietary program. If you just give people like a flyer and say, here, do this, and, go away and come back in 6 months, that never happens, right? Really a dietitian-led program with weekly meetings and also one-on-one meetings with dietitians, I think is really crucial. And so this Renew program has been fantastic. So it's been running since January. And even before that, we did a beta test run with 24 patients with Polycystic Kidney Disease. And it was a fantastic beta test run, I would say. We got a lot of amazing feedback there. We actually published a paper together with Jess, and that's available, that explains what all the details are of the Renew program and what the sort of the qualitative outcomes are. So I think in general, I would say the vast majority of participants in the Renew program, and by now it's been over 100, I think, the vast majority report that it has been up to life-changing. Some people say that has really changed their life and has allowed them oftentimes for the first time to really lose weight, if they were obese before, and do it in a safe way, so that they don't compromise their kidneys even more. And there's lots of improvement in pain levels, for example, but also lots of patients, and it's kind of at this level, anecdotal evidence, I would say, see sort of improvement in the EGFR values, which is fantastic, and maybe not too surprising, because there's already some data out there that plant-focused diets can potentially do this, and so I think that's all really good news. But of course, now we want to test the longer term outcomes there, and that's where those clinical trials come in, where we use the Renew program as a training phase, essentially, in the clinical trial, and then we'll follow patients for a year after that. So they'll do the keto diet plus KetoCitra, and we'll follow them up for a year with all the the blood panels and even MRI scans for total kidney volume measurement, which is something that's kind of peculiar in polycystic kidney disease because these kidneys just grow large. So you can kind of follow the progression by just measuring the total kidney volume in MRI scans. As I said, hopefully we can start these early next year. But because it's a slowly progressing disease, we need to look in the long term to even see any differences there. So the whole trials will probably take, start to finish, I would say 2 years or so until it's all said and done. And until then, we have individuals reporting on their outcomes, and I think it has been largely extremely positive. Yeah.
Amazing. It's just so good to see that a paradigm shift that I'm starting to see now is that a lot of this new stuff has to be education-led and empowered treatments for people with kidney disease, because it's not as simple as taking a pill, which is what we always say as well. It's the change of the diet and managing stress and everything else that goes with it. So it's again, it's so great to see that that's part of the program, that it's all of that sort of stuff in there, because then you really empower people to take that back into their own hands.
Right.
So KetoCitra, if someone was diagnosed with PKD and they think, okay, this sounds amazing, and okay, I need to look at that up, how would they order the product? How would they find out about it? Where can they go to get all of that information?
Yeah, they can just go to the website, santabarbaranutrients.com, and it explains it all. We're shipping now also internationally for personal use. So anyone pretty much, I think almost in any country in the world can order it. And for some countries, the delivery takes pretty long. There's like customs things happening in between. So unfortunately, sometimes it depends on the country. It might take a little bit longer. But everybody should be able to get it. It is, so in the US, it's regulated as a what's called a medical food, which means it's to be taken under medical supervision. So ideally, patients should, of course, always check with their doctor. Anytime you change anything in their diet or supplements or so on, it's a good idea to check with your doctor. Unfortunately, most doctors probably don't know yet about KetoCitra, so I think the typical reaction that a patient gets is, "Whoa, I've never heard of it. Can't be good. Don't take it." So we have to, we have something to do with spreading the word and educating everybody a little bit more. And of course, another reaction of nephrologists is oftentimes, "Oh, show me the randomized controlled clinical study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and then I'll let you take it." And again, that's of course never going to happen. It wouldn't be, no trial could really ever be done to the standards of what the FDA would require for drug approval. But then it's not a drug, so it's a food. But oftentimes doctors get this a little bit mixed up, and they still demand proof to drug standards. So we'll have to just hope that patients are assertive and say, I want to try this, and hopefully get the okay from their doctor that way.
Amazing. Well, I'll put all the details below in the show notes. So I'll have a link to Santa Barbara Nutrients, and maybe can people get a hold of the paper that you did with the sort of 24 people, and I can put the link to that in.
Definitely. I will send you a link. Yeah, it's freely available for sure.
Perfect. And then that might be something that people, if you're interested in taking it, you could take that small trial paper to your GP or your nephrologist and just explain it into bigger clinical trials. But these are the preliminary outcomes. At least they've got something, a bit of a roadmap for them to try and understand more.
Yes, and doctors love that, right? When patients bring them.
They do. Thomas, is there anything else you want to add about KetoCitra, or anything else that you think people should know about the product, polycystic kidney disease, anything that we haven't covered?
Yeah, well, just to say, so I always try to tell people that, I wouldn't think of it as a magic bullet or the pill that solves everything. However, I think it's better than nothing. So better than no dietary changes. So we do recommend KetoCitra in conjunction with sort of dietary changes, and all those that we kind of talked about. But dietary changes are often difficult to do for many people, and they struggle and they give up taking something like a medical food. And it's actually, you know, it kind of looks like this, but it's just a powder. You mix it with water, it becomes a lemonade drink. So it's like super, super easy to drink. So I think nobody should have any struggle with that. So I always recommend start with the easy thing first, you know, start with the KetoCitra. So you have the kind of like a baseline benefit level, if you will, and then try to improve on it, you know, step by step, slowly with some of these dietary changes, which are much harder, right? And you don't want to do all of these 7 or 8 dietary changes all on one day, you know, cold turkey, that probably never works. So you start with one thing, where you increase your water intake, for example. Try this for a few weeks until you're used to it. Go on to the next thing, you know, cut down sugar and so on. So that's probably maybe more of a strategy that I think is more feasible for patients, rather than saying, hey, I've got to do all of these things at the same time, and they just fall off the wagon.
Yeah. No. Amazing. Well, I really want to thank you for your time today and for coming up with something that really is supportive for these people in the polycystic kidney disease community, that gives them a little bit of hope with such good research. And I just want to reiterate what you said at the beginning is, you know, how amazing these two pathways that are already in our body. The fact that, you know, historically we would have been in ketosis all the time in our hunter-gatherer diets, and we would have been alkaline because we wouldn't be eating so much refined processed food. So the pathways are our natural body's way of being, and what KetoCitra does is it just helps to move the body back to a pathway that it would be naturally, and then supported by everything that you mentioned dietary wise as well. So it's very logical when you think about it. It is not, you know, as far as it's got amazing trials and everything around it, it is also not rocket science. What you're hitting on is the natural pathways that would prevent and treat this. And bodies are amazing like that. They are designed to heal. And I guess that's what we like about our more natural sort of ways of looking at it. It's about how do we support the body to do what it already knows what to do. And KetoCitra sounds like that's exactly what it does. So, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
Oh, good. Well, again, thank you so much. I will put all the details where you can contact Santa Barbara Nutrients. You can order KetoCitra there. I'll put the link to the clinical trial that Thomas and his team has done. And we'll definitely catch up again, especially once these big trials start to get underway and just the results and how it's going. I think people would really love to hear about that. And again, if you come up with anything else, and as you're doing your kidney research, and if you find any amazing other things, like the tubules can expand when it's hit with the crystals, like please reach out and let us know.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Fiona. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you so much. And if you want to get more information about this, remember to hit subscribe. If you want to know more about what we do, head over to www.kidneycoach.com. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. If you've got any comments, leave them below and I'll make sure I get back to you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.